Hello, everybody. I am Tim from Linessa Farm, Specialty and Heirloom Livestock. Thanks for joining us again today. So today is the last day that it's going to be just me, at least for a while. We already have a lot of people lined up, and I just wasn't quite ready yet. We have oh boy, 4 or 5 people lined up already to talk, and I just talked to a few more today. So I'm going to try to make the most of this while I can and answer as many questions as I can. And then, next week we'll get going with interviews, and we'll kind of see how things go from there and see how it works. So awesome to see all of you on here again. Lots of the same people and some new people as well. So that is really awesome. We really appreciate everybody coming on here. So things are going really well. The nights are starting to get a little cooler. Breeding season is well upon us here in Northwest Indiana. Most of our ewes and does are already marked, but we're going to talk about that a little bit today as well. That was actually one of the questions that we got on the Tack box during this last week. Was someone said, "Hey, how long do you leave your males in with your females?" So we've talked about using the marking harness for your females. I'm a huge proponent of using the marking harness. And so the marking harness itself is just, it's not that expensive. You're talking 30 something dollars probably, and it's got a marking crayon in it. And so you've got this little crayon that can clip in and clip out. And that essentially has a color on it. It's kind of a wax based, or I would assume like a paraffin based colored crayon. And what ends up happening is when your buck or your ram mounts a female, he'll actually leave a color mark on their back. And it works really cool, because what you can do is when you put your male in there with your females, you can put this marking harness on them. The male will mark them, and then you'll know exactly when they were marked. So what we like to do is when we put our males in there, we like to put the marking harness on. And then after about a week or so, after it looks like he's marked everybody that he's going to, then what we do is we want to swap that color out and put a new color on him. Because what you're going to find is you're going to find that some of your ewes and some of your does get marked really quick and really easily. And then you're going to notice that a few of them get remarked. And so they're going to kind of run in these 14 to 18 day cycles, to where you're going to have markings, and then you're going to have more markings, and then you're going to have more markings, and eventually it's going to taper off to where you don't have any more markings at all. At least that's what we hope. Now, what would happen if, let's say, you got remarkings after remarkings after remarkings? Well, then we're worried. Then we think, okay, we might have a problem with the ram or with the buck. So that's another great reason to do it as well. So swap out those colors, put the marking harness on, and go from there. They refer to these markers as scourable. You'll see scourable sometimes with paints and things like that. And what that means is essentially, if you were to be harvesting the wool, it should technically wash out of the wool. So that's just a term to know. Now, back in the day, before we had these fancy marking harnesses, we used to use chalk. And so there was chalk you could put around the ram or the you could put around the ram or the buck's neck, and it was this big hunking thing of chalk, and you could put it on there, and he would mark the ewes or the does with chalk. If you don't have, and I see Javier just made a statement, he said, "Hey man, listen, it's too hot here, and it just melts. The markers melt on them, these marking crayons." And so, a couple things to answer that question, Javier. Um, uh, a couple things to answer that question or that concern is, there are different temperatures of markers, of marking crayons. So you need to watch that when you order them. And sometimes people don't know about this. So when you when you get your markers, you want to look at the packaging, and it will say hot, mild, and cold, I believe, is generally how they're sold. So obviously, the problem you'll run into is if you can mix match them to where they don't work in either way. So let's say, for instance, you get a cold marker and you put it on them on a hot summer day over 80 degrees, something like that, it's just going to melt. If you get a cold marker and you put that on, it's not going to, or excuse me, if you put a hot marker on during cold season, then it's not going to want to rub off, and then you're going to have problems. So you got to kind of figure out what works, but make sure that you're checking that out. Yeah, no problem. I've had lots of people that didn't know that. So let's say you live in an area where it's like you don't want to put a marking harness on them. Maybe they're in a lot of trees and brushy areas and things like that. And I'll tell you, uh, collars. People love to put collars on their pet goats and their pet sheep, and I get it. Um, Especially when you've got one or two and you're keeping them as pets, I want you to be really, really careful. And you guys know why. Pretty much common sense, right? So if we're going to have them in the woods or around brush or things like that, we obviously don't want anything that's going to get hung up or get them caught on anything or anything that's going to hurt them. And you really got to watch with those marking harnesses. They are very well. Attached to them to where they could get hung up on a branch or something like that. So what do? Let's say you don't want to do this, or you're the frugal guy or gal that's like, I want to save money. Tim, tell me how to save money. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you what to do. So go to the store or go to Amazon and get yourself some chalk that the carpenters use for their chalk lines. And you can buy a bottle of that for very little amount of money. And what you can do is you can mix that in with some vegetable oil, and you can make a paste, and you can just apply that paste to their brisket, to the ram or to the buck's chest, and they'll run around with that. And if they get up on a ewe or a doe, they will mark them and it will come off. It's not super scourable. That is to say, it won't come off very easily. Some people use mineral oil. I use vegetable oil. I have, like, this year, for instance, I had like 5 different pens going with different rams and different bucks. I My main ones that are out on pasture, if they're breeding, 40 or 50 ewes or 40 or 50 does, I'll put a marking harness on them. But if I've got them in a pen with like 3 or 4, I just put the chalk on them, and I don't save my wool, so I could care less. But something definitely for you to keep in mind. So again, super awesome to see all of you here. Thanks everybody for joining us again. Vets Grow Fuzzy Butt Farm, probably my favorite name of all the people that we see on here. So it's a mouthful, but fun to say nonetheless. Goodwood Trapping, you made it to the Wednesday night. Nice. KM, nice to see you. Javier, nice to see you. Sam, Cheryl, hi Cheryl, nice to see you. MC Coil, I know you. So MC Coil is a friend of mine. We served together in the military. So nice to see you, Matt. Nice of you to join us. Kindig, hello. Danielle, hi, Daniel. Nice to see you. Lindsay Farm here. All right, good deal. So if you have questions, just go ahead and start asking. If not, we'll just kind of run through things and talk. So, again, when we're talking about the males and how long you want to keep them in, you want to make sure that you keep them in there long enough. And that's kind of that tricky thing. We want our males to be able to be effective and breed really well. So if you wanted to do everything right, ideally what you would do is you would take your male to the veterinarian, and you would have the veterinarian do a semen check for you, a sperm count check, make sure that everything's going good before breeding season. If you're not going to do that, I understand. What we want you to do is, make sure that they're very well nourished and that they're in there and they have lots of energy, and that they're going to be able to do what they need to do. And we want to make sure that we leave them in there and we keep an eye on them. If they go in there and they start getting wore down, some of these fellows go in there and they don't eat, they don't drink, they don't sleep, they don't do anything but chase the ladies around. And some of them will fall apart on you. I always, always, always want you to have at least a backup plan in mind. Maybe you don't have multiple rams, maybe you don't have multiple bucks, and that's okay. I completely understand that. But if you have a friend or if you have a backup plan, please make sure that you do. Nothing is worse than getting right at breeding season and getting everything going well. And then you go out there and your ram or your buck stepped in a mole hole and twisted his ankle and can't walk, or he gets sick, or you go out there and all the females are rubbing up against him and he's laying down, just chewing his cud, not interested. We've seen that happen too. So, just things for you to keep in mind. I think, yeah, Kindig, I think that, if you're going to put them in there and they can handle it physically, to be in there for a couple months, and that's your primary breeder, I think that's a good idea. If you want to cheat the system a little bit and you haven't given a cedar or that is that progesterone suppository or HCG to your females, then I would say um, you could also throw in a teaser. You could throw in a male for about 5 to 7 days to kind of get the females going, and then put in your breeding male after that. Now, teasers, beware of teasers. Teasers can be if you're going to put a teaser in there that's actually a fertile male, you better make sure that you're going to be okay with the fact of having some babies from him, because some of your ewes and some of your does, man, as soon as you put them in, they will just go right at it. Most of them won't, though. So just something for you to consider. So yeah, I think a couple months is realistic. Just keep a good eye on those males and make sure that that you're keeping an eye on them and make sure they're not falling apart on you. Okay, so Richard, thoughts on leasing a lamb? Man, leasing a lamb is a great way to get started, especially in your area, depending on who you know and what's available to you. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're bringing in a healthy male that's not going to be bringing anything to your farm that you don't want. So, we're thinking about things like, CL, hoof rot, all of these things. Now, look, we can go round and round and round forever talking about things like CL, hoof rot, sore mouth, all of these things. The reality is, as far as I'm concerned with CL, if you haven't seen it on your farm yet, you will. Sore mouth is just kind of one of those things that we deal with. Lots of things. So, there's bigger fish to fry. Just make sure that the buck is relatively healthy. Make sure that he doesn't have any weird stuff like chlamydia, anything like that. We've seen some disasters happen with that. So just do your due diligence. If you know that you've got a healthy ram or a healthy buck, absolutely. That is a great way to bring in some new genetics into your farm. That's a great way to get started. The problem we run into with lots of people, I was just talking to a coworker of mine at the hospital the other day, and she said, boy, we really want to get a good breeding male, but we only have two ewes. They're just getting started. They only have two ewes. And we talked about the importance of those genetics, right? Just like we've talked about a lot of times here on our group, and we've said, hey, this is going to be half of your genetics. Half of the genetics in your flock is going to come from that male. So we don't ever want to skimp on the male. That is, that's a problem. That's where you're going to get yourself in trouble. I don't want to see you skimp on anything. I don't want to see you, um, you know, try to do any weird stuff, or bring in something that's kind of garbage into your farm. But if you want to test the waters a little bit, if you're kind of iffy about an animal, you get a deal but they're healthy, something like that. You get the classic goat that grew up on somebody's farm and it was a pet, and whatever. You get the story, the song and dance. If you decide you want to give them a chance, you're okay doing that with a female. You buy one and it doesn't work out, you can always get rid of them. But by gosh, you don't want to bring in a male that's not that has a defect or something wrong, and then breed them on all of your females. So that's the problem that people run into. It's like, do I want to spend this much money on a male that I'm not going to be able to use that much? Because sure as can be, what's going to happen is you're going to bring a male in, you're going to breed them on two does or two ewes. They're both going to have females, and now you're going to want to breed that whole flock. And guess what? You can't, because now you don't want to breed that dad back to those babies, right? And so now you just spent all this money on this animal, and he's been only good for you maybe for a year. So that's a problem that you can run into and that you need to be cautious of. And we can appreciate that. So, what can you do to get around this? Well, you can work with a friend. You can swap animals, maybe with a friend that raises sheep or raises goats. Maybe you have a buck one year and he has the buck the next year, or you have a ram one year and they have a ram the next year. That's a great way to do it. You can lease an animal. You can idle your male for a year and bring another animal in. Lots and lots of options, but anything you can do to get some genetics. You may even want to consider doing artificial insemination or laparoscopic artificial insemination, something like that. You have lots and lots of options. We actually have a guest that's going to be coming on and talking to us, and she raises the black nose Velaeus, or Velaeus black nose. I don't recall exactly what the correct order of that is, but she does a lot with LAI and artificial insemination. She'll be coming in to talk to us as well, so that'll be kind of cool. But yeah, absolutely, leasing, that's a great opportunity for you, and if you can find someone, please feel free to do that. I think that's a great idea. So, all right, let's see what we got here. Hi, April. Nice to see you. Jamie, let's see what Jamie has to say. So, I have a doe that its eyes started to drain and was getting clouded. So, I gave her 1 cc. That was 10 days ago. And now the eye is pink. So, you'll notice cloudy eyes when females start to get things like pink eye. When they start to get, it can be chlamydia, can be pink eye, can be viral, can be bacterial. So what do we normally do? Well, the cheapest way to work, first and foremost, let me say this. I'm not a vet. I may have mentioned that before, but I always have to mention that. So I'm not a vet. When in doubt, work with your vet. This can be scary stuff, especially when you go out there one day and the eyes completely clouded up to where they can't see out of it, right? So the first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that they don't have anything in there. Sometimes they'll get stuck in the eye with a piece of straw. Sometimes they'll get stuck in the eye with a piece of hay. It just makes sense, right? They're sticking their head in there and they're eating this stuff, and it happens. So you want to make sure that nothing is actually in there, and we always like to just flush it with normal saline. I think that works out fine, or sterile water, something like that. I don't want you necessarily flushing it with tap water or hose water, because if they don't have bacteria or anything in there, you could be introducing that. So stick to something that comes out of a bottle, like distilled water, normal saline, sterile water, something like that. So we want to clean it out. Then we want to take a cool compress, maybe out of a piece of paper towel or something like that. When we want to wipe the eye from inner canthus to outer, so we start in the front and not too hard. We just want to clean it off, clean off any of that goop, and then we want to take a look in there and see what we see. Now, always, always, always wear gloves, because you can catch some gunk from these animals. It's going to be very difficult to determine if you're dealing with a virus or if you're dealing with a bacteria. But what the old timers like to do, and what we actually still do here on our farm, is you have two choices. One, you can let it go and let it run its course, and generally speaking, it will clear up on its own. If you're worried about it, what you can do is you can take some aqueous penicillin, some penicillin G. You can just take it, draw it up in a syringe, take the needle off, and use that as an eyedropper. And we want you to treat both of their eyes. So I just pull it down a little bit. I give them a drop in each eye. And I'm going to do that twice a day in both eyes until the eyes clear up. Once the eyes clear up, I continue to give them those eye drops for 2 more days. And usually that will clear them right up. Now, who is to say if it's always bacterial? If it's not bacterial, if it's viral, I'm not really doing any good. Then I'm just kind of kidding myself, and it's more of just like prophylactic, just in case. But that's what we do. If we notice some eye issues, we do that. If they get super cloudy eyes, you may want to put them into a sick pen and keep them put up in that sick pen, because if they can't see very well, it's going to be harder for them to find food. It's going to be harder for them to find water, and we don't want them getting beat up by any other animals as well. If you don't have a sick pen on your farm, that's okay. We at least want you to keep some panels around that you can make a sick pen in a snap if you need to. Lots and lots of times where your animal may be down, they may be sick, maybe they have scours, maybe something's going on. It's great to have an area that you can put your animal, even if it's just for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Just maybe you gave them medication and they're not feeling good. Maybe you need to put them in there for a few days. We like it to have our sick pens where our animals can still see and interact with the other animals. They just can't get to them, and those animals can't get in there as well. It just works out better that way. These are pack animals. These animals all have a pack mentality. They kind of go bananas if you get them by themselves, and that's okay. They get stressed, and sometimes it won't help. But make sure that you have some area available where you could put them. If they're going to be blind and they can't see, we most definitely want to consider that as well. So, great question, and I'm glad you brought that up. I would say the terramycin ointment, that comes up a lot. That stuff is super duper expensive. It's super duper messy. And to be honest with you, I just don't see great results with that. The other time that I would use penicillin as an eye drop is if I get a lamb or a goat kid with an inverted eyelid, and I actually have to put a little staple in there to hold that eyelid down for a couple days. I will give them penicillin just because of the scratching that happened to the cornea, just to make sure that everything's okay. So hopefully that answers your question. All right. I'm not against giving other injectables if you feel that your best course of action, maybe your veterinarian directed you to use like Draxin or Nuflor or tetracycline or something like that, and that's okay too. We just use the penicillin. We feel that that's what works best for us. So let's see what we have here. Brian, what month is best to put bucks in with the ewes, and what is the chance on naturally breeding rather than using a seeder? I work all the time, and sad to say, I run my buck year round with the ewes. Okay, so here's kind of the down and dirty on that. That's a complicated question. Now, I've been trying really hard to watch other YouTube videos. I really struggle to do this, not because I have anything against any of the other channels. I just don't have the time. If I'm not at work at the hospital and if I'm not at home taking care of my own animals, I do a lot of research and a lot of reading so I can present information to you guys without being a knucklehead. And that is a full-time job. A lot of times I'll get questions from you guys and I'll be like, I know the answer to that. But I always like to look things up and make sure that I'm giving you either the most up to date information I can or the most correct information that I can find. I really don't like giving information without having something I can reference you to. So if I'm going to say something, I like to be able to say, and this is where you can go to read more about that. If you're not a member of the Tack box, you should be. So you can find us on Facebook. Just do a simple search for Linessa Farms Tack Box. I post articles on there all the time, and most of you, I recognize your names. I know that you're on there. Uh, and so you see all the time, I'm constantly posting articles, little quick reads that I find are helpful that you guys can read and learn from. So, anyways, so when it comes to breeding our sheep and our goats, you're going to hear a couple different things, and the truth is this: some breeds of sheep and some breeds of goats will breed all year round. There is no specific time that they will breed. However, some breeds will only naturally go into estrus in the fall. That is to say, when the nights are getting a little longer, the days are getting a little shorter. Now, obviously, if you guys are living in the southern hemisphere, you know that this is backwards. We're talking here in the United States, northern hemisphere, Europe, Canada, things like that. So there's actually things that get triggered in the animal's brain, and I'll see if I can post something for you regarding this, regarding the hypothalamus and some other things. And what ends up happening is there's actually a chemical response that occurs with the eyes in the sheep and the goats, and when they're getting certain hours of daylight. And once those hours of daylight go down, it actually triggers something in the brain that helps that animal to go into estrus better than they normally would. So even the animals that normally don't need a certain time of year to breed will go into estrus a little bit better during the cooler fall months. So temperature plays a minimal role in it. Really, we're dealing with hours of daylight is the big one. Once they start to cycle, generally speaking, they'll continue to cycle until bred. Now, we can go into the deep weeds of different things like the ram effect. Like there is a natural thing that happens if they haven't been around a male for a long period of time. A lot of these things go down to Mother Nature, and we could have a whole video segment or a whole hour-long segment just on all the cool things that Mother Nature has figured out with these animals. So, part of us is saying, okay, well, why in the world would these animals get selectively bred? Why would Mother Nature choose to have these animals have pregnancy in the fall and then have their babies in the spring? Well, the reason for that is when you're talking about feed, they have enough nutrition to get pregnant in the fall, then they carry that baby during the winter, and then when things start to warm up in the spring, lo and behold, that's when they're having their babies, and babies tend to have a better survival rate. The same thing comes into the ram effect. The ram effect is when you have a male that hasn't been around, or excuse me, you have a group of females that haven't had a male around them for a very long period of time. When you introduce that male, they go into estrus. It helps to trigger them to go into estrus. And there are some caveats with this, but this is Mother Nature's way of saying, hey, here's a group of females that our sole purpose in life obviously is to reproduce. They haven't had a male around. Now one's here. This would be a great opportunity for them to get pregnant while they can. So I watched a video recently, and the guy was talking about how, he thought the best thing to do was to let his rams run or his bucks run with the females all year round, and this was better. I strongly disagree with that. I think that controlling the amount of time that your rams and your bucks are in with a female gives you a lot of control. And we had a video on that recently where we talked about that. It allows you to really synchronize your feeding appropriately, your vaccinations, your mental health as far as when you're delivering babies and all that stuff. There's a lot of advantages. Plus you can flush your females, and you tend to have more twins, more triplets. And that's what this guy said on his video. He said, well, I will say I have more singles than I do twins than I have triplets. But in his defense, he said, I just don't want to deal with it. So long answer to your question is the fall months. When I see that the nighttime temperatures consistently start dropping into the 50s, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, we're getting close. Usually, if they're not bred and we're getting into September, you can figure that that's going to work. Temperature does have an effect on females. If they get pregnant and they're exposed to too hot of temperatures, we had it happen a couple years ago where we had all of our ewes and all of our does bred, and then we got a heat wave where we were in like the high 90s, and they just absorbed the embryo, and then they're all open again. That's just a term we use, open, being that they're not bred, and then they all had to get bred again, and it was a disaster. But long story short, fall time. If you can find a way, Brian, to make it work to where you can keep those males separated, try it. See if it works for you. I think you'll be happier in the end. It'll be a little bit of a learning curve for you, but I think in the end it'll work out better for you. So, and yeah, absolutely, they'll breed naturally. Like, you do not have, the reason we give the cedars and the reason we give the PG 600, so the progesterone and the HCG, is to time them and to synchronize these ewes and these does so they all get pregnant at the same time. When you're running a herd or a flock of 40, 50, 100, 200, you want to have control over that. So I know when all mine are going to be born in the spring, I'll actually take a week off of work. This year, a majority of our animals are going to be born the week between Christmas and New Year's. And so that's a slow time for me at the hospital. Generally speaking, I don't see a lot of patients. I'll have them, I'll take the week off. The kids are off school that week. It just works out well for us, but that's the benefit of keeping them separated. One of the many benefits. So thanks for the question, Brian. That was a great question. Let's see what we've got here next. Joaquin. Hello, Tim. What are some tests, labs or blood draws that you would do on rams to make sure they're good quality rams? So Scrapey is a good one to test for. You can go nuts on this, and you can test for lots and lots of stuff. I think that Scrapey is a good one. You'll see that we have a video on that where we're talking about Q and R. We have a lot of videos that I did back in the day on genetics. If you haven't seen those yet, just do kind of a search and look for Linessa Farms genetics, and we talk about Scrapey and the Scrapey eradication program and the Scrapey tags. There are some things that either used to be really heavy that aren't around too much anymore. Spider Gene was one of those, especially with the Hamps and the Suffolks. We saw that a lot with Spider Gene. That's really not even a thing anymore. And now we're seeing a lot of Dwarf Gene, and that's something that you can test for as well. You can test for CL, you can test for OPP, you can test for CAE. There's lots of these kind of like, maybe they're going to be hidden disease processes that will manifest themselves later in life. The big ones that we like to test for on our farm. So the main thing, obviously, we want to test our males. We test for Scrapey to see if they're a carrier or if they're not, and that's just because a lot of people want to know. And the other one we test for is Dwarf Gene, because I'll tell you, a lot of the show folks have started breeding in dwarfism into their flock. Especially the South Downs have a lot of it, and we see it in some other breeds as well. When you think dwarf, don't think like super duper small. What you'll see a lot of cases with a dwarf, I know we have a South Down ram that carries Dwarf Gene. He'll have babies that are just built like a chest freezer. They're sturdy, stocky little dudes, and they'll grow like crazy up to about 60 or 70 pounds. And then it's like somebody puts the brakes on them and they just stop. So it's not even necessarily a bad thing because I can get them to market quick if they're going to sell for meat. But I sure wouldn't probably be comfortable keeping them around as breeding stock. Some of them show really well as well. So uh, look up labs online. I will post something on the tack box for you as well. That's a great question. I think I'm going to ask Aaron Jennings. He would have a better handle on that. Aaron's one of our moderators, and he's kind of a show guy. He's more of a show guy. And so we'll ask him that. We'll post a better answer for you on the tack box as far as where you should send your lab work in to and what exactly it is that you want to be looking for. Aaron will have a better idea of what's more prevalent out there right now as well. And we can go from there. So great question. Thank you very much. Okay, next questions. Are breeds registered? If I buy a sheep or a goat from auction, is its lineage officially just whatever the seller records, if at all? Yeah, so um, most breeds in the United States have some kind of a council or some kind of an association that oversees that breed. So you have Dorsets, you have, so Dorset Association oversees like polled Dorsets, Dorset Advantage, regular Dorsets, you have Hamps, you have South Downs, you have Shrops, you have, you name it. There's an association for it. And Boer goats, if you guys haven't dealt with the Boer Goat Association yet, some of these, some of them are very inexpensive. Some of them are very easy to deal with, very inexpensive. Others are ridiculously expensive. Some of them you pay once to become a member and that's it. And then it's an annual fee for registration. Others, it's like, one thing after another with these fees, and it gets ridiculous. So I have talked about this quite at length in the past, and I'm going to give you this piece of advice. You may get yourself into a situation where you have to have your animals registered, depending on if you're going to show and what breed you're going to show and what species you're going to show. If you want to be a big time Boer goat shower, you're going to have to register your goats through the American Boer Goat Association, whether you want to or not, or a lot of these shows are not going to let you even walk in the door. If you are a commercial breeder, I will tell you that the only animals that I breed or the only ones that I register are the ones that I am selling where the customer asks for the registration. I do not waste my money. I keep good enough records that I know their lineage, and if I ever need to register them later, I can. They charge me more money to register after the fact if they're over a certain age, but I don't care. I haven't registered an animal in quite some time. I think in some ways it's a scam, and I don't want to take away from, and I have a caveat with saying that because I don't want to take away from any one association and I don't want to take away from anybody that shows with registration. I get it. I understand it. But behind closed doors, most people, I feel from conversations that I have, will agree with me that a lot of it is a scam. It's just one more way for somebody to take money out of your pocket. Times are already hard enough. We're already having extremely small profit margins. And when you tell people it's got to be registered, it's got to be registered. If I'm paying you $60 to register my Boer goat, like that's a problem. Like that's a huge part of my cut. And I can't justify that. Just because an animal is registered does not mean that it is what it says it is. And it also doesn't mean that it's any better than any other animal that's out there. And I've said this before and I'll say it again, I have a file cabinet full of registration paperwork. I could register my dog to be whatever, if I just wanted to do it on paper, I could just send in paperwork and make up registration and just get registration if I wanted to. There is nothing stopping me from doing that. I don't do that, but that's what my problem is with it, is that I know it's like, yeah, I got a piece of paper, but it doesn't mean anything. Now, some of the associations require DNA, and the DNA can make it more difficult to do this. But a lot of these associations will tell you, like the American Boar Goat Association, they can get your animal's DNA to make sure that it is who they say it is, but they can't tell you what percentage it actually is. If it is a full blood, they can tell you that the lineage says it's a full blood, but they can't show you in the DNA that it is. So there's lots and lots of loopholes, lots and lots of problems that you can run into. So just keep that in mind. Um, if you go to the farm, ask to look at the animals and make a judgment call based on the soundness of the animal and the quality of the animal that you see in front of you, not on the paper that you see. I hear stuff all the time where people are like, "Oh, this one's brother was a champion, or this one's dad was I don't care. I don't care. I don't care what when you met your spouse, were they like, yeah, they tell all their friends, they're like, you see my husband over there, his brother's pretty hot. Like, no, it doesn't make any sense, right? We care about what we see in front of us. That's what's important. So don't get all hung up in what this animal's daddy was or his mom was, or if his brother was a champion. It doesn't matter. It matters what the animal looks like that's in front of you. Sale barns, you're not going to get anything. You're not going to get any background. You're not going to get any lineage. They're going to run the animal out there. They're going to tell you its weight, and that is all that you are going to get. And you don't know if that animal has disease. You don't know if it has hoof rot, sore mouth. You don't know if it's sterile. You don't know if it aborts its baby. You don't know anything. So that's why for breeding stock, we tend to tell people to just stay away from the sale barn, because you're really, really rolling the dice. Okay. Red chalk is permanent, so use blue or green. Good point. So take it there, folks. So we were talking about putting chalk on our animals earlier for marking. So keep that in mind. All right, Javier, is there an AI kit? No. AI done properly, you could make a kit. There's older ways to do things, but you're essentially going to have to buy a straw or more of semen. That's going to be shipped to you in a special container, or it's going to be shipped to your veterinarian's office. You're going to have to store that straw in a specially cooled device. You're going to have some specialty tools like what's called a speculum and some other things. You're still going to have to treat your doe or your ewe with drugs to cause them to be in estrus, because you want to make sure they're in estrus when you do this. If you're doing it right, you actually want to test the semen under a microscope to make sure that it's viable. So there is a lot of things that you need to do. It isn't as simple as just getting a straw of semen and just putting it in there. There's lots and lots of things that go into it, lots and lots of tools, and lots of prep work. You can take classes. There are classes online that you can take. You can read about it. You can buy all the stuff online. If you were going to do it, I would highly recommend you find somewhere that's offering a class and do an in-person class. Learn how to do this and go from there. Okay. Great question. All right. Rob, hi Rob, got questions. How big should the sick pen be? So if you're raising sheep or if you're raising goats, I think a good size sick pen, if it's for one animal, would be, I like to say an 8 by 8 or a 6 by 8 foot pen is a good size. Now that's a little bigger than I would say for a lambing jug. Most of our lambing jugs are approximately 6 foot by 6 foot, and our kidding jugs, those are the places that we put the mom and babies to bond right after delivery. I make my pens, my sick pens, a little bit bigger, and I will tell you why. So the reason that I make my pens a little bit bigger is because sometimes I will put animals in a sick pen that maybe they aren't quote unquote sick like we would normally think of them. Maybe we have a muscle injury, or maybe we have a bone injury, or something like that. And maybe it's one of those times of the year that all of my animals are out on pasture. If that's the case, I will normally bring a buddy in and put a buddy in with them. It is not good for them to be alone. And so we find that they heal faster and they do better if they have a buddy, especially if we're dealing with a broken bone or a sprain or something like that, something that's not super contagious. We'll put a buddy in with them, just to kind of help keep them eating, help keep them drinking, and just to keep them company for sanity's sake. So when I make my pens, my sick pens, I'll make them about 8 foot by 8 foot, because that's pushing the limits of what you would want to confine two animals into. And we'll go from there. The other thing we like to do with our 8 foot by 8 foot pens is if we have two boys that can't seem to get along with each other, we will sometimes lock them in a pen together. If it's such a small area that they can't get enough speed to back up and ram each other, we basically let them pout it out in there together for a couple days, and then they become friends, and then we let them out. So when it comes to your males, if your males are fighting, you either got to give them enough room to get away from each other, or you got to put them so close together that they can't get away from each other, but they can't build up any steam in order to ram each other. Generally, you won't have two aggressive males. You'll have one overly aggressive male and one kind of subservient male. And as long as you give that subservient one enough room to kind of get away from that mean one, they'll just run away and they'll stay away from them and you're fine. Or, like I said, you put them in together. Now, you will run into it if you have two males that are both kind of large and in charge, and you don't have anything separating them but a fence. They'll beat each other to death through a fence. So, play it by ear. But the whole point of the sick pen is, if it's going to be a single, 6x6 works. If it's going to be bigger than that, you could go up to 8x8. So hopefully that answers your question. Hopefully that makes sense. Okie dokie. I am planning to grow super Napier grass for goats, but heard that has 2.5% oxalate. Should I grow the grass or not? No idea. No clue. I know with some grasses we have to be cautious because of prussic acid and some other things. Some of like sorghum grass, Johnson grass, things like that, we have to be cautious with, because what happens is if the grass gets stressed, or they get hit with a frost, it will actually cause them to release prussic acid, which is cyanide, and then it'll poison the animals and they'll die. So even during a drought, it can cause some increased toxins in there. But I don't know a darn thing about the grass that you're talking about, so I will have to educate myself on that and get back with you. So that's a great question. And I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for you. So that's kind of a bummer. You came on here to ask me a question, and I don't have an answer for you. But hey, you know what? I always say I can deal with I don't know. I just can't deal with people giving me bad information. That's not helpful at all, right? So the answer is we'll find out together, and we'll both learn something. Okay, what do you think about using rams for breeding? Looking at 2 for 45 head. Yeah, 2 for 45 head would be just fine. I would split them up, and go from there. So if I had 45 head and I was going to breed them with two rams, I would split them in half, and I would put one ram in with half. If let's say you're okay with both of them breeding, let's say the perfect world, you're okay with both of them breeding, you could put one ram in with, we'll say, you know 22 of them, the other ram in with 23 of them, and then after a week or so you could flip flop those males. That would be great. Or you can kind of look at the side. The best answer is you look at each ram individually for his attributes, and what he has to offer, and you pair him accordingly. So maybe one ram has a little bit more shoulder that you need, or maybe one ram has a little bit more length that you need. And so you kind of pair it up with your females, and you say, okay, well, I like this one here, and I'm going to start off there, and then after 18 days or a month or so, you can switch them, and then if they breed on the other ones, that's okay too. I like the idea of switching them, and the reason I like the idea of switching them is insurance policy. If you get one that's out there shooting blanks, at least you would have your bases covered with the other one. At least you would see that he's remarking and doing what he needs to do. So definitely something for you to consider there. I wouldn't put both of them together in there. And that's a tricky thing. You may get away with it. It may work out fine, but what you're gonna find is that they're gonna fight. And even if they're not outwardly like button heads with each other, what you're going to find is one ram's going to be mounting ewes, and then when he's doing that, the other one's going to be coming up behind him and beating the snot out of him. Or together, they're going to start tag teaming and kind of running your ewes or your does ragged to where they're like it becomes borderline harassment. They're already going to harass the females anyways. It gets really bad when uh, the female is not really standing for them yet and they're really beating up on them. So just something for you to keep in mind. So if you can, split them and go that route. If you can't, maybe just run one, give them a break, run another, give them a break. 45 is pushing the envelope for a mature male to handle, but if they're not all synchronized together, he could probably handle it. If you're talking about a 3 or 4 year old male that's really at the prime, if he's really at his peak, he could probably handle that many as long as they weren't all synchronized. The problem you run into is if you synchronize them all with a progesterone suppository and HCG, they're all going to cycle at the same time. And I think you'd be pushing the envelope as far as you'd be kind of be pushing your luck as far as getting him to land all of them at that first time. So, great question. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that sounds okay for you. Um, so year-round breeding animals, are they more cranky? Um, Kind of. So that's a good question. So what you'll notice is the issue with your males. If you keep your males in with your females all the time, even a normally docile male, so this is what I tell customers. So customers come by and they're like, "Hey Tim, I want to buy a ram. I have a nice family that's coming by this Sunday. They're going to buy a ram, and they told me we want a ram. We have kids. We don't want something that's going to beat the heck out of them. What do you have?" And I said, "Oh, I got this nice ram. He does very well, um, but when those ewes are in estrus, he becomes aggressive. That's what they do. Even and this is anecdotal evidence, but I believe it is true. I've seen it. I think it is true. Even for shepherdesses that are running, running their flocks or their herds, even when a human female is in estrus or on her period, the males can actually smell that and they can become more aggressive with you as well. So for instance, I went into a pen here recently at a customer's home, and as soon as I went in there, I know the ram that they have, and as soon as I went in there, I was like, "Oh, you've got some ewes that are in estrus." And he's like, "How can you tell?" I said, "I can tell by the way your male's acting." And he was abnormally aggressive when he normally isn't. So even the most well-mannered male will get a little pissy. I don't know how else to say it nicely. They'll get a little pissy when it gets to that time because their hormones are kicking in. And so what you find is when you're running males with females open herd all year round, is it seems like you lose that control where those females are bunched together and they're kind of cycling all together, and now you'll have this one's having babies now and this one's having babies later, and you have all these hormones that are going all the time to where someone's always in estrus, someone's always pregnant, someone's always having a baby, someone's always got a baby on them, and it seems like that male is really inundated with a lot of confusing, I guess, hormonal signals all the time, and we do tend to see them be a little bit more grouchy, I guess is the best way to say it, more often than they would normally be if you were to keep them separated. So hopefully that makes sense. All right. Brian, I'm as green can be to sheep. Well, we all were at one time, my friend. Trust me. I've raised cattle for years, and I just got into sheep for about a year. And you would think that sheep are like cattle, but man, I was wrong. Yes, you were. And I'm sure there's other people on here right now that are kind of chuckling as well. Like, Yes, you were. Most people that are getting into sheep and goats are will tell you the same thing. They will say, "I cannot believe how hard these things are to take care of," and I don't think that's necessarily accurate. I don't think they're that hard to take care of. I think it's a hell of a learning curve to get into to really figure out what works well and what doesn't. And I think a lot of people get burned with sheep and goats initially, and I think they get out of it. I think if they stick with it long enough that they get out of it, but they learn real quick that you have to get to know your animals, and that if they're sick, I mean, even showing the slightest sign of sickness, like you better do something right now. Because with sheep and goats, there is no wait and see. If you go out there one day and your goat or your sheep is acting weird and you're like, something's not right, they're off feed, they're off by themselves, they're not doing well, whatever, you better do something. You better do a wellness check. You better check temperature. You better check eyelids. You better do something, because if you don't, you'll go out there tomorrow and they'll be dead. And that thing that really gets people. Um, that's that thing that really gets people with sheep and goats. A lot of the vets say, like a sick goat's a dead goat, a sick sheep's a dead sheep. My friend Dr. Rumsey, veterinarian at up the road from us here, he's famous for saying if you're going to have livestock, you're going to have dead stock, and he says that in meaning that if you're going to have livestock, eventually you're going to have problems and some of them will die. And no matter how hard you try, I think people beat themselves up a little bit too much about this, a little bit more than they should, because things happen, and I know you guys are all doing your best. You want to do what's best for your animals. That's why you're here. And that's why we talk. And we learn together, is because we all want to help each other so we do well. And things happen. These animals can't talk to you. They can't tell you when they're not feeling good. We can't do diagnostic lab work like we can in a hospital setting. If a patient comes into the hospital and they're not feeling well, we draw lab work. We check hemoglobin. We check white blood cell count, red blood cell count. We can check all kinds of things to tell what's going on in the body. We can do blood cultures. Not to say that you can't do these things with your sheep and your goats, but the reality is you're not going to stay in business very long if you're running a CBC and a BMP every time you get an animal that's not feeling well on your farm. So it's tough. It's a tough thing, but you'll get better at it. You'll get better at it all the time, and you will learn to respect your cattle a little bit more, because we have cows, and every time I look at my cows, I'm like, boy, you sure are easy. They seem to have a little bit more tolerance for illness than the sheep and goats do. I guess that would be the best thing I could say. So I see a thing here where they say Hampshire dwarves question mark. Dwarf Gene, again, it's probably not what you're thinking. So when you're thinking Dwarf Gene, you're probably thinking like little tiny. That's not necessarily the case. And then, what is a hamp? I hate to say that, but when you go to the show circuit and you look at it, you're going to see some of those hamps are going to be hamps. Some of those hamps are going to be hamp crossed with Suffolk. Some of those are going to be hamp crossed with Southdown. It just depends. There are definitely muddled bloodlines out there. I personally have never seen a hamp that I would put my finger on and say that it had dwarf gene. But I would bet the farm that it's out there, it's been bred in. So any animal that's going to be bred for club lambs, I would say you have the potential of having it in there. So you'll just have to be cautious with that. So monensin, yeah, that's safe for sheep. So that's a anti-coccidia medication. We have a wide range of anti-coccidia medications. So we've got Bovatec, we have Dectomax, or excuse me, Decox. We have Marquis paste. We have all kinds of different medications, but monensin, yeah, that's something that is safe for sheep, so you can use that. All right, got a question for you. I'm going to the Oklahoma Hills Invitational Kiko Goat auction. Very cool. Any advice on what to look for in a Kiko goat? Yeah. Depending on the age, I would say you don't want to get super hung up on the size of it based on its age, and a lot of animals are this way. So when you go to buy your animals, you want to do research and make sure that you know how they grow. So I know one of our guys that's going to be coming on here to talk with us, hopefully, Chris Kreider. Chris is a historically he was a Columbia guy. Now I think he's Columbia and Ile-de-France, but he had Columbias for a very long time. And you go to a Columbia farm and you're really taken aback. Columbia sheep. One of the first things you see when you look at Columbias is the sheer size of these things. And I had a Columbia ram that I got from Chris back in the day, and at full height, he was looking me in the eyes. Not quite. I don't want to over exaggerate, but he was. When we sold him at the sale barn, he walked the sale barn floor at 400 pounds, 405, I think. And I want to say at the top of his head, he was like 5'6" to the top of his head. But here's the thing. Someone could come out to my farm and they would look at that animal and they would say, "Holy smokes, I want that." Well, what they don't know is it took him 2 years to get that big. Actually, 3 years. He grew and grew and grew till he was 2 years old, and then from the second year to the third year, he really filled out. So, what the way that these animals grow, you want to do your research when it comes uh, to that specific breed. So when you're looking at a Kiko is not going to grow the same way that a boar is going to grow. A Kiko, in my experience with the Kikos that I've dealt with, is they grow tall and long first, and then they tend to fill out from there. Where my boar goats, they kind of fill out as they go. Just like an alpine, I can take an alpine will grow kind of the same way. It'll kind of grow up and out, and then once it gets to its mature size, it'll start to put on weight as well. And we see this with our sheep. And so that's why you really want to watch when you're buying sheep. You want to buy, or goats, you want to buy them for the to have the right attributes for what it is that you're doing. So before you go to buy an animal, you need to ask yourself, what am I doing with this animal? What is my plan? Am I raising this animal for meat? Am I raising this animal for dairy? If I am raising it for meat, how big do I want them to be when I sell them at the market? Do you want something that just grows like hell and gets to 60 pounds as fast as possible? Maybe a Dorper is the answer for you. If you want something that's going to be huge and long, you may go with something like a Columbia. If you want your goats to grow super duper fast and get just to 60 pounds and you're going to get rid of them, I don't really know if you can beat a boar goat. But then the beauty of it is if you don't get yourself too hung up on one specific breed, you can breed in different breeds together to maybe get something better. Maybe we can get that hybrid vigor in there. Maybe we can correct some problems. I don't like the milk production aspects of a full blood boar goat. I just don't. But boy, I sure like their size. I sure like their carcass. I sure like their muscling. So what I can do is I can breed in maybe a dairy goat into a boar goat. And I can correct some of that problem. Maybe I can breed. I have some boar goats here that have dairy cross in them, where I've bred in a dairy goat, or I've bred a dairy. I've bred a boar on a dairy doe, and then I get a nice animal out of that, and then I breed them back into a meat breed. So I have better milking ability and I get better carcass quality. So you can kind of play with that. The thing you have to realize though is that takes time. So, every little Frankenstein move that you make, every kind of weird science move that you make, that's going to take a breeding season. So keep that in mind. Things aren't going to happen super duper fast. I love Kikos. I think they're a beautiful animal. They're just nice to look at. I think they're an all around great goat. If you're going to have a meat goat, they're okay in so many different aspects. You're going to get pretty good mothering ability. You're going to get pretty good milking ability. You're going to get a pretty good meat carcass off of them. So I think they're a great. I think they're a great base breed. I've seen some really really nice boar Kiko crosses. We had a boar Kiko cross buck for years, and we really really liked him. So yeah, just make sure you're doing your homework and talk to the breeders and just ask them, how does this guy grow? How do you expect this guy to grow? And they'll tell you. They'll know exactly what you're talking about when you ask them. And a lot of times at these auctions, you can go up to the breeders there and you can just talk to them about the animal. Say, hey, how do you expect this guy to grow out? And they'll tell you. They'll be like, he'll be hitting, this weight at about this time. You're going to see him do this. You're going to see him do that. And everybody's different. So that would be my advice to you. Okie dokie. Um, Also, my goats come into the barn at night and they have lights that are on. Do you think that would keep them from going into estrus? No. There is a way that you can manipulate estrus with lights. I don't think you necessarily need lights on at night. If anything, put a couple of night lights in, just a little night light in, so they can kind of see where they're going. But there's no reason to leave the lights on. That's a long story that we can get into, but yeah, you can manipulate estrus by putting animals into a dark barn for certain hours of the day, but that's a long-winded conversation. But basically, if you're leaving the lights fully on, I mean, I don't know if you looked at your power bill recently, but mine, I actually lost consciousness here a couple weeks ago when I opened up my power bill. I'm not looking forward to winter. But you can get by definitely with some night lights, and I think you'll be happy with that. So okay, but keep us posted. When we see you next, let us know kind of what was going on at the auction, and if you don't mind, take some pictures, post them on the Tack box so we can see. You're going to see some beautiful goats out there. I like to go to shows. I like to look at the animals I can't afford. It's kind of like going to the car dealership. When they're ringing up the numbers for the $20,000 car that you're going to buy, it's fun to look at the $80,000 cars that you can't afford. I just like to sit on them and look at them. And if you guys haven't been to North American International Livestock Show down in Louisville every fall, if you want to see what there is to see in the United States, it's a great place to go. You can see all the breeds from all over the United States. I always tell my wife I like to go there. It makes me feel bad about myself. I see some of these animals and I'm like, holy smokes. I'm like, I have pretty decent looking animals. And then I go to North American and I'm like, wow, I do not have as good of animals as I thought I did. But it's fun to see. So you can check that out. Yeah, the lights will help with your chicken's egg production, but hey, those chickens need to molt. So, don't run them too ragged. All right, so let's see what else we got here. Is there anything else bad about dwarf sheep other than the size? No, I don't think so. I think that it depends on what you're raising for. Kind of going back what we were just talking about, you have to be able to answer that question for yourself. We have raised Nigerian dwarfs, goats, and we raise pygmy goats, and I just love them. They're just fun. And if you're raising animals for pets, you've got baby doll sheep, and you've got you got harlequins and all kinds of, there's lots of fun breeds out there. Don't get too stuck in a mindset either. You should always look at different revenue streams that you can get for your farm. There's lots of ways that you can make revenue for your farm other than just selling for meat. You can sell breeding stock, you can sell specialized breeding stock, you can sell pets, you can sell all kinds of stuff. So look at your market, find out what works for you, and then answer that question for yourself. And I'm not trying to give you a tongue-in-cheek answer. I'm just saying there may not be anything bad about having a dwarf whatsoever. You may have a market in your area that really wants them. See how they grow out, see if they meet your needs, see what weight you're selling your animals at, and go from there. Feed conversion ratio, shoot, I if I can get an animal that gets up to weight really fast and I can get them to the sale barn quick, then that works for me. So just something for you to keep in mind. So good, fair question. And we'll get you some more information. I seem to have piqued some interest on the dwarf gene, and so when we get Aaron on here to talk, we will ask him more about that as well. Can rams and bucks run together in a bachelor flock? I have had success with this for my extra roosters. As long as they can't see the girls, they get along pretty well. Absolutely. So we have very, very successfully kept rams and bucks together, sheep and goats together. You want to be cautious with the horns and make sure that you're not going to cause any issues there. Uh, but yeah, we have male sheep and male goats that live and function together in their little bachelor group, and they do really really well. It's amazing when you get them away from the females, that and they kind of get out of that mode and they start to calm down. And yeah, they'll become buddies with males that you put them in there with, and that works really well. If you don't have an extra male to put in with your male that you're pulling off your flock or your herd, you're going to have to put in what's called a sacrificial female, and you're just going to have to give him a lady friend, something. You just can't keep them alone by themselves. They will just it is not a good animal husbandry practice. It is not healthy for them mental health wise, and it's just not good. But absolutely, yeah, we have definitely kept males together, and of different species, and they've done really well. So good question. Okay, Jamie. Hi, Jamie. So Jamie wants to know, this is from last week's question about my buck that has hair loss. I gave him Safeguard and his hair is coming back slowly. Very good. Can I give him Dectomax this week? You absolutely can. So we really like Safeguard. Safeguard is a nice, gentle warmer. It's not the most effective warmer in the world. We have unfortunately found over time that we're having to give larger and larger doses of Safeguard to be effective. We just had a friend that had a really bad worm load, and she ended up having to give a really she's in Australia. I think she had to give a monster dose of Safeguard before it worked, and that's too bad. It's unfortunate we're getting worm resistance. But in a way, that's kind of what I like about some of these wormers. When we talk about getting up into some of these heavier duty wormers, it's nice to be able to stair step up to them. Maybe we start something a little bit more gentle, and then we go to something a little bit more aggressive, and then a little bit more aggressive from there. So if you gave Safeguard and the Safeguard worked, and he seems to have tolerated it well, and you've given him a week or so off, yeah, absolutely, you can inject him with the Dectomax, and that will further help to clean up any residual that the Safeguard didn't get. Now, the Safeguard is going to get one thing that the Dectomax isn't, and that's going to be tapeworms. So if you did happen to have any tapeworms, hopefully that Safeguard was able to get it out of that. Remember, white worms, white wormers. So white worms, white wormers. So Safeguard, which is also can be referred to as Panicer, and then our Valbazin are our two main white wormers that we think of. When you think of white wormers, think of white worms. So if you have a white worm, like a tapeworm, you got to use a white wormer to get rid of it. So I like that you did that. It'll also treat him for other things like gastrointestinal roundworms, whipworms, barber's pole worms. And now, if you hit him with that Dectomax, while that Dectomax will not treat effectively for tapeworms, it will help to clean out anything else that he possibly has. So I would say definitely go for it, see what happens. Keep us posted. All right, everyone give the video a like. Oh yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, guys, that doesn't matter. I always forget to ask for the thumbs up and the likes. I don't know why. It's just it skips my mind. I get going. It does help us. And to be honest with you, there's no real tangible that comes from getting a thumbs up or getting a like. What it does is it causes the video the more interaction that Facebook and YouTube sees, the more they refer your video to people to watch. So if you do a thumbs up, which you don't have to, if you enjoy it, do the thumbs up. If you don't, that's cool. But if you give the thumbs up or give comments, it does help our video to kind of get out there more. So I do appreciate you saying that. Thank you. So Luke. All right, Luke, let's see what we got. What is a good way to butcher a Dorper lamb? Also, is there a difference between a ram lamb, a castrate lamb, and a ewe lamb as far as meat quality? Ha! Oh man, you could start a firestorm with this question. So, um, it depends on the geographical location. So the sale weight depends on the geographical location. What you want to do is you want to find your closest sale barn, and you want to call your sale barn and you want to ask them, and just ask them, say, hey, I'm raising some Dorpers, and what is my market weight that I want to hit? And they will tell you, and they will say 60 pounds, 80 pounds, whatever. They're going to know what that market weight is that you want to hit for the most money. Now, if we're talking about you and what you want to eat, that comes down to personal preference. Now, I will tell you how I eat my lambs, and I'll tell you how I eat my goats. And some of you are going to be angry at me, but this is what I do. I get the legs deboned and netted. and the rest of it gets turned into hamburgers because we love our hamburgers on the grill. And what we will do, or I'll get it turned into brats, sausages. It's easy to cook, it's easy to freeze, it does great. You can even, if it's too lean, you can put in some pork fat with it and go that route. Completely depends on what you want to do. But if you want to know what's the best bang for your buck, you call your local sale barn and they'll tell you. Me personally, in my area of Northwest Indiana, I want my animals to hit a market weight of between 60 and 80 pounds. That is the most bang for my buck. That is my most uh, money per live weight pound that I get is in that market. And that goes for my goat kids too. If I can hit between 60 and 80 pounds, that's where I'm going to get my most money. So that's what I aim for. You're going to have no problem hitting that window with your Dorpers. If anything, they're going to hit it fast. Now, me personally, if I'm growing mine out for personal consumption, I'll grow mine out to 140, 160 pounds. That's me personally. I just want to get the most out of them that I can. Difference in taste. I would challenge someone who's eating a 6 month old or 7 month old ram, ewe, or a castrated one to be able to tell me the difference. But I will tell you this, you start getting over a year of age and oh buddy, you can most definitely tell a difference in the taste. I can't tell much of a difference between the castrated rams and the ewe lambs, but the intact males, I can, once they reach sexual maturity, I can taste some of it. It has a kind of a gamey taste in it. Once you get over a year in age, I think that as the fat content gets into the meat, you can start to get kind of a muttony taste to it. If you're going over 2 years, oh wow, like I almost won't even touch the stuff. Some people love it, I don't. So I would say though, under a year, you're pretty safe either way. But everybody has different palates, right? And a lot of it comes down to what are you feeding your animal? What's the quality of the feed that you're feeding the animal? That makes a huge difference in the quality of the meat and in the flavor of the meat that you're going to get. So definitely something for you to keep in mind. So Vets Grow Fuzzy Butt Farm. We need to get like an acronym, or we'll do like VGFBF, something like that. Someday when we have more time, you'll have to tell me how in the world you came up with that name. That is I can just picture like you and your significant other like sitting down at the table, and you're like, "What should we go with? Should we call it Bob's Farm?" And she's like, "No, no, no. We should do Vets Grow Fuzzy Butt Farm." And you're like, "Yes, yes, that's great." So very interesting name. So yeah, keep us posted. Oh, you have a YouTube channel. Awesome. Oklahoma. What is, if you have time real quick, put down what your YouTube channel is on here. Is it Vets Grow Fuzzy Butt Farm? Is that the name of the channel? If so, we will all have to check it out. So everybody, Vets Grow Fuzzy Butt Farm. That is easy to remember. I will definitely check you out. Very cool. All right. Thoughts on dual purpose sheep breed for regenerative grazing on small acreage. If you're not completely averse to wool, and I find that a lot of people are averse to wool. I wish they weren't. I really like pulled Dorset, I'll say this: the proof is in the pudding when it comes to uh, Dorsets. And I'm going to say this really quick because if I don't, I'm going to forget. A challenge to you guys. Some of you are going to be like, "No way." Hey, if you raise sheep, um, try getting a goat sometime just for fun, just to see what it's all about and see how you like it. If you raise goats, get a hair sheep. If you don't want to deal with the wool, get a hair sheep. Um, go step a little outside your comfort zone. You can run these animals together very, very easily. You'll have to watch with the copper, and we can work around that. That's very easy to work around, but try it. Especially if you're raising for meat, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Either if you have sheep and you try goat, or if you have goat and you try sheep. So check that out. I really like Polled Dorset. I think Polled Dorset is a fantastic breed, and I think the proof is in the pudding that lots and lots of people that are using recips for laparoscopic artificial insemination, and for embryos and stuff like that use Polled Dorsets. They have a decent mothering ability. They have decent milk production. They have decent carcass weight. Everything about them is there's nothing about them that is subpar. I would say there's nothing about them that's like overly fantastic, but man, they are just great all around sheep. They have pretty good demeanors. I think they're a great animal for people to get started with. If you want to get started with polled Dorsets and you want to get started with traditional polled Dorsets, Jeff Hunter is the man in the United States. Um, Jeff Hunter is located in Lafayette, Indiana. People come from all over to get animals from Jeff Hunter. He is well known. This guy's had a closed flock since like the 1980s. Everything is genetically controlled. It is an amazing operation to see. And we are friends with Jeff. We're going to go out to Jeff's farm. We're going to get some videos on Jeff. But anyways, if you want to think about polled Dorsets, they're great. I think Katahdins are great. I think Dorpers are a little wild. I like a lot of things about Dorpers, but man, they're a little nutty, um, uh, and that can be a problem. I think St. Croix. I think there's way too much hype about St. Croix for what you get. I don't like their feed conversion ratio. We have raised a ton of different sheep, and I'm not going to list off all the ones we've raised again, but I'm telling you guys, we have raised lots and lots and lots of different breeds of sheep. I like There's so many breeds that I can tell you that I love certain things about them, and then I don't like other things. And polled Dorsets, at the end of the day, are a nice breed to get. I think Katahdins are a nice breed to get. If you wanted to go all hair, I think Katahdin would be a decent avenue for you to go. I think if you get more experienced, and you get more of a comfort level for handling sheep and dealing with sheep, I think Dorpers are tough to beat as well. So, and we can kind of talk more about that, but chew on that a little bit, do some research, Alex, and then get back with me and let me know what you find out, and let me know if you have any more questions. So Vets Grow Fuzzy Butt Farm. I'm a military vet, and all of our animals have fuzzy butts. And yes, Vets Grow Fuzzy Butt Farm on YouTube. So vets, as in military veteran. Okay, great. So I'm a military guy as well. You've probably picked up on that. So super cool. Nice to meet you. I'm still in the military. I don't broadcast that very much, but I need to retire really bad. I was active duty for quite a long time. I had a break in service, and then I went back in the reserve. So I am actually still in the military. So between working at a hospital, having the farm, doing the YouTube channel, I'm also a reservist in the United States Air Force. So holy smokes, right? I'm a busy guy, but I keep telling my wife I'm going to retire. And eventually one of these days I will, or they'll just make me. So anyways, last but not least, Luke, thanks, Tim. I'm in Northwest Indiana, so guessing my market weight would be about the same. Yep. So Northeast, pardon me. So yeah, what I would advise for you, Luke, is check out Shipshawana and check out Rochester. And you can contact both of them. Those are good sale barns that are somewhat in your area, assuming that you're maybe a little bit west of Fort Wayne. Maybe you're not completely over at the Ohio state line. Check out Shipshawana, check out Rochester. And for all of you, no matter where you're at, you can go online and you can search for the nearest sale barn. If you have questions about what sells and what doesn't, call your local sale barn. They want your business. They want to sell your animals, and they will be more than happy to tell you, because the better quality animals you bring them to sell, the better they're going to do and the more profit they are going to make. So they want you to do well. They don't want to keep secrets from you. They don't want to have you bring something that's not going to do well. They want you to bring the best weight and the best animal that you can. And you can ask your sale barn as well. Say, hey, what breed do you see that sells the most? And you may be surprised. Some sale barns may tell you, depending on the community that's buying, some sale barns may tell you that, they see their dairy goat kids do really well. Some of them may tell you that their hair sheep don't do well at all. Some of them may tell you black face sheep don't do as well as white face sheep, all kinds of weird stuff. So it just depends on the market. So keep that in mind. If you haven't established a relationship with your local veterinarian yet, I would encourage you to do so. You don't want to wait until there's an emergency to find a vet. Find a vet now when you don't need them. That's the best time to find a vet. Same thing with your sale barn. Find your sale barn friend when you don't need them. We want to have plans in place for when emergencies happen. With that being said, it's been a pleasure talking to all of you again, just as always. I really look forward to seeing you guys again next week. We will be in our new studio. God willing, we will have some guests. We have videos finally coming out on doing your own fecal samples, which will be out this weekend. It has been great talking to all of you. I hope everyone has a very safe and a very happy Labor Day weekend. I will see you all again next week. Thanks for joining us again today. I'm Tim from Linessa Farms, Specialty and Heirloom Livestock, and I'll see you